The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and religion. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Percy Sutton, Chair Emeritus of Inner City Broadcasting Company, former borough president of Manhattan, and a political savant for the ages. This particular program is dedicated to the memory of Rosa Parks, who recently passed away, and her role in the civil rights movement is one that we all remember and we want to discuss today. Percy,
yes,
what is your opinion about the role and the significance of Rosa Parks in the civil rights movement?
I think it was quite significant. There are a number of people who played roles, but she was unique in the sense that she had been an activist. She and her husband had been activists in the NAACP. And she came along at a time when you had some strong people. There was a man named Nixon who headed the NAACP there in Montgomery. I knew him well. I got to know him better. I knew him when he was at Tuskegee. I used to come down there to talk when you were there at Tuskegee. Nixon used to come there. And he tried to organize the NAACP there at Tuskegee. And she was a classy lady. Her pictures do her well. And one of the beautiful things about her is that she believed, and she was strong. And her husband believed, and he was strong. They were both very strong in the NAACP.
As a matter of fact, many people of the younger generation don't realize how strong African Americans had to be, particularly those who were in professions and business and in protest movements. Because at that time, the racists would just as soon kill you,
yes, burn
your house, take your job.
Oh, yes.
And one of the things that happened to many of the civil rights pioneers, whom we all should respect, is that they lost their job. Yes. In the case of Emmett Till, he lost his life. In
yes.
the case of Swerner, Goodman, and Cheney, they lost their lives. In the case of Medgar Evers, he lost his life. So, and this wasn't just a frivolous, incidental thing. It wasn't incidental violence. This was purposeful violence to
yes.
oppress black people. And Rosa Parks and her husband and Nixon are all symbols of that generation back in the 30s, 40s. As a matter of fact, I read that Rosa Parks, as a teenager, was involved in the protest against the trial of the Scottsboro boys, 5 black boys who
yes.
were arrested and charged erroneously for raping a white woman. And that was the cause célèbre when you and I were youngsters. Well, Rosa Parks was right there.
Yes.
And the other thing I find interesting, and I talked to some young people about this, they didn't realize that Rosa Parks was 42 years old. Yes. They thought she was just a young woman who was just getting started. Oh. And as you say, the tradition behind Rosa Parks and the Montgomery Improvement Association goes back long before December 1st, 1955.
Yes. Collaterally, when we talk about the civil rights movement and the indignities that we suffered, blacks suffered, we were colored at that time. We referred to ourselves as Negroes.
But the distinguished word was Negro. At
yes,
that time,
yes,
if they called you Negro with a capital N, you were respected.
That's right. Now, you were, I remember days when you, as a hot pilot, were in Italy, and you were a lieutenant, and you headed a squadron. And yet, at that time, no prisoner of war, German prisoner of war, was required to salute you.
That's right. And
yet you were an officer fighting to make America safe.
And they would go to the white mess hall where folks ate,
yes,
and we had to stay to the segregated mess hall.
That's right. That's right.
It's the
all a part of the civil rights.
Now, it's
struggle.
very interesting. Recall, blacks have been here since 1619 and got their freedom ostensibly in 1865.
Oh, most of them.
You think
in Texas, where I come from, we
didn't happen.
That's right.
That's why you
Not
had,
right away.
That's why you have Juneteenth. Actually, it's interesting to conceptualize how people of our race were considered chattel and slaves and property. And yet, as we began to develop, particularly after the Civil War, Reconstruction, became scientists and doctors and lawyers and business people, then the oppression got even greater. Yeah. The oppression on African Americans was really greater in that Reconstruction period than slavery.
Yeah. You know, what I was impressed, may I interject this with regard to the whole treatment of Rosa Parks. Mm-hmm. I am so proud that all those people came to visit her in the rotunda, because I remember staying up all night when a man named Lyndon Johnson was on view. The reason I stayed there was I had betrayed Lyndon Johnson. I had liked him, and I had supported him when he ran for president. I had deserted him because I didn't agree with him on Vietnam. I wanted us to leave Vietnam. I know wars, and you know wars, and I want to see us get out of there. But Johnson decided not to run for president again as a result of that, and he did not see a victory in Vietnam. Now, what does that have to do with Rosa Parks? To see this black woman being honored, and to see the climate having changed sufficiently for the United States government, with a right-wing president in office, there would be a man called John Conyers, a congressperson who has just a few years seniority on Charlie Rangel, which means he came there before 1970, hiring her and bringing her to Detroit, where he presides still. And it has to do with what will we do, how many times will this be repeated, of us within the black community reaching out to take care of our heroes and sheroes who are willing to make sacrifices. So, one, for Mr. Conyers, Congressman Conyers, getting in touch with her and bringing her to Detroit, to his home in Detroit, and employing her all of those years, and to then, when she dies, be a part of the engineering of getting her in the rotunda of the United States Capitol. And then the NAACP intervening through these two young people who are there. Well, at least one of them is young. Julian Bond is the chairperson, and the new president who comes out of the business community has taken over. And they had a proceeding down in Montgomery, Alabama, where it all had started. And then another one at the churches, and then the rotunda. And now, tomorrow, if I might use that, on Wednesday, the 2nd of November, flags will fly at half-mast.
By order of the president.
By order of the president, this right-wing president of the United States.
See, it's very interesting.
Yes.
Symbols are very important in a struggle. We have on our set here Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman, first woman to run for vice president. Frederick Douglass.
No, for president.
For president, pardon me, president.
I put her in nomination.
You tell us about that a little bit. Frederick Douglass, the great emancipator.
Yes.
Martin Luther King, who is the spokesman
Yes.
of the Civil Rights Movement,
Yes.
and Jackie Robinson,
Yes.
my friend, who broke the barriers
Yes.
in the League of White Baseball.
Yes.
Symbols are very important, and Rosa Parks,
Yes.
great as she was, is even greater as a symbol.
Yes.
Where else would you think that she's the first woman to lie in state
Yes.
in the Capitol, United
Yes.
States Capitol, and of course the first black to lie in state in the United States? Did Martin Luther King lie in state in the Capitol?
No.
I don't think so. It's very interesting. Things have changed.
The climate was not
The climate
here
has
then.
changed.
Yes.
And flags at half staff.
Yes.
And recall the protests against having Martin Luther King Day as a holiday.
Yes. Yes.
So in a sense, it's like the nation trying to cast aside
Yes.
some of those poor memories and poor behaviors that have made us the laughingstock of some
Yes.
parts of the world. So Rosa Parks, aside from being a courageous person, is a symbol.
Yes.
But we also know, history tells us, that she wasn't the first black person to be arrested sitting in the front of a bus.
No. No.
There were a lot of us, including
Yes,
maybe
yes,
you and
yes,
myself.
yes, yes.
But she was the first one behind an organized movement
Yes.
that said, look, we're not going to tolerate this. We're going to shut down the Montgomery Bus Company.
Yeah.
And a year later, the court said discrimination in public accommodations
Yes.
is wrong.
Yes.
And that change, that was the beginning of the change, because recall,
Yeah.
the civil rights law wasn't passed until 1964.
Yes.
Martin Luther King spoke in 1963, the March on Washington. So we had a heck of a lot of work to do.
Yes.
And in between then, we had Little Rock, we had Cheney Goodman
Yes.
and Swerner, we had Medgar Evers, and of course, our great friend right after that, Malcolm.
Yes.
So we're talking a history of 60, 50, 40 years.
Yes.
And for those who are watching this program, asking them to take this trip back into history is very important.
Yes.
And to talk with one of the leaders of the civil rights movement. Now tell us how we transition from Rosa Parks, Montgomery bus boycott, into the civil rights movement that did in fact overcome.
Now, what is so interesting to me is that the media, whether newspapers, magazines, radio, or television, all have saluted Rosa Parks. You would think that she was white, in the way white people get projection. And there seems to be no anger towards her. There seems to be media support for her, and this is good. It means that America has moved a little faster than some of us had thought it had. But that is, in that venue, it was in 1961, in March of 1961, that a man by the name of Percy Sutton and his friend Mark Lane integrated the lunch counter in Montgomery, Alabama.
That's right.
Huh? I remember telling the story of what it was like to, all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. I wanted to get arrested in Atlanta, Georgia, because I really didn't want to go on to Mississippi, where I was on my way to. I was afraid, but I knew I had to be brave. And I remember them following us with baseball bats and shotguns and these touring cars knocking on the bus. And I remember people, I was sitting in the front of the bus with Mark Lane. And I remember the people, he was a lawyer who wrote many things.
And Mark Lane was white, of course.
White lawyer who was in the state assembly at that time. And we went there, a man by the name of Gardner was helpful to us in making that trip. And we got down there, and when just as we were about to get off the bus, the man that to my left, we were in the second row in front of the bus, and the man had told us to get in the back of the bus, and we refused. And the poor black people in the back of the bus came, as The intensity occurred along the way. It said, "Mister, please, please come back here. Don't stay up there. You're going to get us all killed." As we were getting off the bus, I tell the story of what it was like along the way. The veins of my head seemed as large as my middle finger. And I was massaging them. I thought my head would explode. And just as we got ready to get off the bus, to go into the lunch counter, the man that I saw to my left, a giant red-headed man that I had assumed was a racist, stepped in front of me and said, "Mr. Sutton, there's a violent crowd out there. You're going to the lunch counter. Please move swiftly because it's very dangerous." And he showed me his FBI badge. And Mark Lane and I went to the lunch counter, and the lady at the lunch counter said, "What do you want, nigger?" And I remember the words coming to me, said, my voice couldn't come. It said, "Some orange juice, please." And that lady took a glass of orange juice, warm orange juice, and slid it down the counter. And that was the nicest orange juice I ever tasted. And as soon as we finished that orange juice, there was a gentleman from the FBI who escorted us out. And the man who was there waiting for me was a man named Nixon. What relation does a man named Nixon? He was the guy who headed the NAACP in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, on December the 1st, when Rosa Parks stayed on that bus and brought history, brought the change in the law as a result of that.
Well, how do you think the act of Rosa Parks and the courageous act of people like you and Mark Lane and some of the rest of us who did things like that,
yes,
how do you think that evolved into a movement that changed America's attitudes on race?
If you see other people doing things, television did much to change it all.
The beating of the boys.
Let me just tell you
Go
something.
ahead.
I had an office on 125th Street. I was Malcolm X's lawyer, but I was also an activist in the NAACP. And the black nationalists were on the other side of the street from where Malcolm X was. They were near the Teresa Hotel. I was on the other side near the bookstore.
Monsieur's bookstore.
Yeah, Monsieur's bookstore. And I remember the black nationalists used to talk about going down to Alabama and Georgia and taking their shotguns. And I used to say to them, I said, "You don't understand. You're knocking Dr. King because he's walking in the streets. And they're putting dogs on him. And they're putting hoses on him. Fire hoses. Knocking people down with fire hoses." I said, "But you see, the people he's working with will bring about change. What you're talking about is taking guns." I said, "But let me tell you what will happen to you if you go down there with guns. Number one, as soon as you get on the bus here to go down there, 1 in 8 of you will be an informer." Huh? 1 in 8 of you, one may be a police officer. And all along the way, every time you stop to go to the bathroom or buy food or anything, they'll be in contact with the people at Bull Connor in Birmingham who are waiting for you. And when you get there, and you get off the bus, and you've got your guns, if you have the nerve to use a gun, the shooting begins. And then you're in the neighborhood and you see that little house there. You're in a black neighborhood and you see safety, you think. And you get off the bus and you could hardly make it to the steps, but you crawl onto the front porch So you think you're safety. And the black face that comes to the door and to the window says, "Go away, mister. We don't want no trouble." Huh? They're rejecting you and your methodology.
Mm-hmm.
But King prays with them on the street. So there was this debate that was taking place at that time of the black nationalists and Malcolm and the NACB and CORE.
And SNCC.
Congress of Racial Equality.
And the Student Nonviolence, SNCC.
And Student Nonviolence, yes, I'm sorry. You should never let them pass without speaking of them.
So therefore, they put their bodies out in nonviolent protests, which some of the Northerners were making fun of.
Well, they're making fun of them because they had never been involved.
They'd never been involved.
Yeah.
But then, what do you think the pivotal incident was that changed the belief of the nation? What do you think that one pivotal thing was?
I think it was King in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
King in Birmingham.
In the letter from Birmingham jail.
Yeah, that's right. Wyatt Walker, who was then his chief lieutenant, was a brilliant man, a good advisor, and worked well to organize things for King. That was a large measure of the success. Television, television, television. When people could see what was happening on your evening news, you saw people being beaten by hostile police, all because they wanted to walk in the streets. You saw people at lunch counters being beaten by police. You saw the students in North Carolina at lunch counter being beaten by police, all because they were at a 5 and 10 cent store. And you saw all of that on television. And pretty soon you saw Catholic sisters, whites. You saw priests. You saw white people being involved. And also you saw a number of white people being beaten badly.
And murdered, like Viola Liuzzo.
Exactly. All of this was a part of the continuum, if you will.
So then, in 1964, Lyndon Johnson makes a speech by saying, racism is wrong, we shall overcome. And that was the trigger for the civil rights law.
That's right.
That ended much of the discrimination.
That's right.
And made it possible legally to end it.
Yes.
And then followed by the Voting Rights Act.
That came after 1963 when Mr. King had a dream.
Electrified the world.
That's right.
I think if we look at the civil rights movement, people will remember Rosa Parks.
Yes.
They remember Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream.
Yes.
They remember Lyndon Johnson, We Shall Overcome.
Yes.
Now, the fact those are three pivotal incidents, but all of the things that you've been discussing with those tens of thousands of people in the streets.
Or the dead people.
And the people who lost
were killed, people who were lynched, people who protested and were beaten to death. People, or the indignities inflicted upon people. I remember when I was, I come here from Texas, and every year would go down to see my parents, and have to go, no place to sleep at night. I couldn't go to a hotel, so I would leave here early in the morning to drive to a place in Ohio where there was a colored hotel. And from there to Missouri, where there's another colored hotel. And then have to drive all night to get to San Antonio. Couldn't stop to eat, couldn't. There was nothing.
And now, we can go to any one of those places. So then, in a sense, the door of opportunity, if you have enough money, is to travel, to stay in hotels. But the door of opportunity is still partially closed. To African Americans and other people of color. And that is why our honoring, the nation's honoring Rosa Parks, is a tremendous tribute. But it should also be what I would call a wake-up call. We can't just say we are whole because we're not whole yet.
And she said that on occasion.
She said that many times.
Remember, things have changed,
And
but we're not happy yet.
And our political leaders,
Yes.
African Americans,
Yes.
have to remember that, as many of them want to cross the line and say everything is fine and we're going to get ours. The fact is, everything is not fine.
Fine. Yeah.
And until the entire country recognizes that African Americans should make 100% of what white families make, when right now they only make 72%. That
Yes.
is the clearest index of the racism that exists in the society.
Because I've been active in politics in my earlier years.
Oh, yes.
I want to make a point. Charlie Rangel.
Could you make that quickly, because we're coming to the close of the program?
Oh my! When you attack me as a politician, then you come to the close of the program.
Okay, I'll give you a chance.
Seriously though, Charlie Rangel has introduced legislation to salute you and me and all of us who are in Tuskegee Airmen. But also Charlie Rangel has been openly gracious and strong, as have all of the members of Congressional Black Caucus. And I've been watching what has been happening in New Orleans and elsewhere, because there you see poverty among whites and blacks, but you see it hurting disproportionately the blacks.
And as we close our
Yes.
tribute to Rosa Parks, I want to thank Percy Sutton, one of the pioneers in the movement, and hope that we will take the lessons of Rosa Parks and move ahead.